we do have in the studio with us the Chief Inspector of Prisons who took a look at Manston, Charlie Taylor. Charlie, great to have you this morning. Let's just start with the basic facts here. What did you discover through your visits to the Manston Centre? Is it in your view, and I put this question to Robert Jenrick earlier, is it in your view fit for purpose?
Well, we visited originally in the summer, and though we had a number of criticisms that we made of the centre, actually it was generally functioning reasonably well, as was Western Jetfoil at Dover, where migrants arrive off the boats. I then returned in September to have another look, and already we were beginning to see some of those risks that we'd flagged up in the summer manifest themselves. So people were starting to spend longer on site, people were unable to make contact with family, people were staying in accommodation that wasn't good enough. What we're now hearing is that things have become much worse, that people are spending much longer periods of time at the centre, and that I've announced that we will go back and re-inspect in the near future.
When you say that the accommodation is unacceptable, just to explain exactly what you mean by this. I mean, ultimately, this is a site at which people are supposed to be spending no longer than 24, 48 hours.
That's right. It's a short-term holding facility, and that means people should come in, they should be quickly processed, and they should move on to suitable accommodation. What's happening at Manston when I visited was people were sleeping on the floors, on their rubber mats down on the floors, and then very thin blankets or mattresses. Lots and lots of people in a room, all squished in together, very uncomfortable. There's the room for families has lots and lots of different families all sharing the same room, very young children, older children, and for a few hours that would be acceptable, but where people are spending long periods of time there, it just isn't.
What about the health concerns that there are on site? We've had reports of cases of scabies, of diphtheria, of MRSA. I mean, all of that it must be troubling to you as well.
Well, it's inevitable if you put people together in very close proximity for long periods of time, particularly people who've come from parts of the world where perhaps they haven't had the opportunity to have vaccines. Unfortunately, the risk is that things like scabies or diphtheria will appear.
A person in your position, and I know this because my grandfather actually worked in the Inspectorate for Education, you have to choose your language very, very carefully. When you tell the Home Office that they need to get a grip on this situation, that sounds to me like the strongest criticism that someone in your position can possibly make.
We'll be back at the centre. We'll be looking to see an improvement in treatment and conditions of the detainees who are there. And yes, they need to get a grip.
Is this situation solvable? Is it fixable? And if so, how?
I think it is fixable. Providing suitable accommodation for people, making sure that the processes that happen in Manston are efficient, that they're streamlined, that there are enough staff in order to do that. Now, there are many complications. It's a difficult site to run, but we've seen it operating pretty well when we were there in the summer, so this is doable. But for whatever reason, things seem to have unravelled more recently.
Just in terms of the day job, and you are in and out of prisons up and down this country, comparing Manston to your average prison, the idea that someone can't use the toilet without having the door open, the idea that people are not having access to fresh air, I mean, it strikes me that those are things that would be unacceptable and rarely to be found in the prison system.
I would be horrified if I went into a prison where prisoners didn't have mattresses, where prisoners didn't have flushing lavatories, where prisoners didn't have telephones that they could stay in touch with family and friends. Those are three things that we see at Manston. Similarly, if they couldn't get out into the fresh air.
And, of course, one thing that you don't find in mainstream prisons, you find it in young offenders institutions, young people. Just a word from you on the way in which they're being treated. We heard, anecdotally, one child had been detained there for longer than 48 hours. Other children are, as you mentioned, sleeping on the mat. I mean, that in and of itself should be enough to prompt a government into action.
It's extremely concerning that children are being asked to sleep on the floor in accommodation that's wholly unsuitable. And bear in mind that some of these people have had incredibly long journeys. Some of them are potentially victims of torture, victims of all sorts of abuse, and also potentially victims of trafficking as well. And the idea that we then expect them to sleep on the floor for long periods of time just is not acceptable.
So what happens next from your position? What is the timescale that the Home Office has to get this sorted out? And if it doesn't, and you mentioned you're going back in to see what happens, and if it doesn't improve, what is the following step?
Well, we will return to the site. We won't announce when that will be. We'll return to the site. we will expect to see substantial changes in what's happening there. We'll expect to see migrants moving on more quickly to suitable accommodation, and that many of the things that we flagged up in this report in terms of seeking out people with vulnerabilities, making sure that victims of torture are identified, making sure translation services are in place. We'll be going back and we're looking for those things. If we don't see an improvement there, we will raise our future concerns.
Charlie, honest question. I mean, have you seen anything like it before?
It's a real worry. Now, we were there earlier in the year when things were not so bad.
Yeah, indeed.
So we haven't been back to inspect recently. We will go back and see. But what we're hearing from a number of very credible sources, Sir Roger Gale, from Dave Neal from the Inspectorate of Borders, from trade unions who are working there, that things are going wrong at Manston. And as I said before, the Home Office need to get a grip.
Charlie Taylor, great to have you in the studio this morning. Really appreciate it.